Agatha Raisin and the Secrets of the Quiche Past. Dear listeners, welcome to tonight's mystery. I'm Jane, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you here for another captivating tale. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop your answer in the comments. I always enjoy learning more about our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe. It will motivate me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and begin tonight's story. Chapter 1. The Peculiar Invitation. The morning sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of Agatha Raisin's Carsley cottage, casting delicate patterns across the tidy kitchen table. Steam rose from her mug of Earl Grey, curling into the air like invisible ribbons as she settled into her usual chair and contemplated the serene start to the day. The village outside was quiet, punctuated only by the occasional chirp of birds and the distant clatter of a milk delivery cart. It was the sort of morning that promised nothing more dramatic than a leisurely cup of tea and perhaps a stroll to greet neighbors. That promise shattered with a faint, almost polite scuffle beneath the door. Agatha glanced down and saw a pale cream envelope sealed with a delicate swirl of deep violet wax. Curiosity prickled along her spine as she bent to retrieve it. The envelope bore no return address, only her name, elegantly penned in ink that shimmered faintly in the morning light. Something about it felt deliberate, considered, and just a touch theatrical, a detail that immediately caught her attention. She eased the seal open and unfolded the stationery within. The handwriting was delicate, almost feminine, with flourishes that spoke of care and ceremony. Dear Mrs. Raisin, you are cordially invited to participate in this year's Carsley Annual Quiche and Tea Contest. Agatha's eyebrows arched. A village contest seemed harmless enough, yet the phrasing, cordially invited, carried a weight that made her instincts tingle. Her eyes darted to the postscript, written in slightly smaller script. Remember, sometimes the most extraordinary secrets are baked within. Agatha's lips pursed in intrigue. There was something playful, almost teasing about the words, as though the sender expected her to notice their double meaning. A flicker of excitement warmed her chest. It wasn't just the quiche contest that beckoned, it was the puzzle beneath the surface. Agatha lingered by the window, the letter in one hand, and a faint sense of unease brushing against her usual cheer. A shadow flitted across the garden path, so quick that she questioned whether she'd imagined it. The breeze shifted, rustling the ivy against the cottage wall, and for a moment she felt the sensation of being observed. She set the letter down and peered out, catching only the ordinary sights of Carsley's tidy hedges and cobblestone lanes. Yet the tiny pulse of suspense persisted, mingling with the soft comfort of her morning. Agatha smiled, a glint of excitement dancing in her eyes. What might appear to others as a simple quiche contest was shaping up to be something far more deliciously mysterious. With careful deliberation, she folded the letter and placed it atop the kitchen counter, where it caught the light. The shadow of curiosity, barely perceptible but undeniably present, lingered. Today promised more than tea and pastries. It promised questions, secrets, and the subtle thrill of a puzzle waiting to be solved. And for Agatha Raisin, that was irresistible.
Agatha Raisin moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who took pride in both her kitchen and her own reputation. The morning sunlight streamed across her counters, illuminating the jars of herbs, neatly stacked mixing bowls, and a collection of knives that gleamed like tiny sentinels. Today was no ordinary day. Today, she would bake her entry for the Carsley Annual Quiche and Tea Contest, a tradition she approached with a mix of pride, determination, and a dash of competitive mischief. She pulled her apron from the hook by the door, the pastel fabric soft and familiar under her fingers, and tied it with a flourish, as though preparing for a small ceremonial ritual. As she laid out her ingredients, free-range eggs, rich cream, fragrant Gruyere, and freshly harvested leeks, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The contest was a village spectacle, filled with eccentric characters whose quirks were as celebrated as their culinary skills. Mrs. Bloxby, with her sharp tongue and tendency to gossip with flair, was likely to be in attendance. Then there was the timid baker from the cottages at the edge of town, always flustered but surprisingly cunning when pressed into competition. Agatha hummed softly to herself, recalling past contests. She had won once, lost twice, and survived a particularly dramatic incident involving a sabotaged oven and a panicked dog. Each memory brought a chuckle, a reminder that even in a sleepy village, intrigue had a way of sneaking into ordinary moments. As she set the butter to soften, she noticed something unusual, a small folded scrap of paper tucked beneath the sugar canister. Curious, she bent down to retrieve it, but the moment passed before she could examine it further, for a soft, deliberate knock sounded at the door. "Mrs. Raisin," said a voice, thick with habitual urgency, "I hope I'm not intruding, but one must speak the truth when the occasion demands it." Agatha opened the door to find Mrs. Bloxby, her shawl draped with impeccable precision, eyes sharp and slightly mischievous. "Tea?" Agatha offered, although she knew the older woman would accept purely as a formality. "I'll have tea," Mrs. Bloxby replied, stepping inside with the careful elegance of someone accustomed to imposing presence. "And you must heed this, my dear. Not all is as it seems in the contest. Watch closely. People have their ways, and some of them are subtle or devious." Agatha arched her eyebrow, hiding a small smile. The warning was vague, tantalizing, and precisely the sort of mysterious nudge she loved. As she poured steaming water into fine china cups, she kept one eye on the scrap of paper that had slipped her notice. Something about the morning already suggested that secrets, though small, were scattered around her cottage like breadcrumbs waiting to be followed. Once Mrs. Bloxby departed, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and admonitions, Agatha returned to her preparations. She rolled out the pastry with care, feeling the smooth, pliant texture beneath her fingers. The leeks sizzled gently in butter, their aroma curling through the air like a promise. Each motion, from whisking eggs to folding in cream, grounded her in the comfort of routine, while also sharpening her anticipation for the contest. As she set the quiche in its tin, ready to be baked, her mind danced with possible scenarios. Rivalries rekindled, secret ingredients swapped, and whispers exchanged in hushed corners of the village hall. The kitchen smelled of promise, buttery warmth, and just a hint of suspense. Agatha smiled to herself, savoring the gentle thrill of anticipation. Today, the ordinary would meet the extraordinary, and she would be ready. The oven door closed with a soft click, and Agatha leaned back, taking a moment to survey her tidy cottage. Light danced across polished surfaces, the aroma of quiche hinted at delights to come, and outside, Carsley carried on, blissfully unaware of the small mysteries stirring within its walls. For Agatha Raisin, the morning had set the stage perfectly, balancing comfort, curiosity, and the faint thrill of secrets yet to be uncovered.
Chapter 2. Whispers Among the Pies. Agatha Raisin stepped out of her car, inhaling the crisp autumn air that carried a hint of damp leaves and wood smoke. The village hall stood ahead, cheerful banners fluttering from its modest facade, their pastel colors announcing the annual quiche and tea contest. The front doors were propped open, and a faint hum of chatter, punctuated by laughter and the clatter of trays, reached her ears. Already, a crowd of contestants had gathered, moving with a curious blend of nervous energy and polished confidence. She walked up the short stone steps, adjusting the hem of her pastel apron and straightening the bow at her waist.
Her eyes roamed over the scene, taking in the familiar faces of Carsley residents and the newcomers who had decided to try their hand at village tradition. The air was rich with the scent of freshly baked pastries and rich cheeses, mingling with the faint perfume of lavender from bouquets arranged along the windowsills. Agatha smiled. The hall itself, warm and bustling, seemed alive with secrets, small ambitions, and subtle rivalries. Inside, tables were set with meticulous care, each displaying a quiche in a delicate tin, some adorned with perfectly arranged garnishes, others slightly askew, revealing the human hand behind each effort. Contestants whispered to one another, some exchanging friendly encouragement, others casting quick, guarded glances at those they considered competition. Agatha noted Mrs. Bloxby fussing over a neighbor's crust, her sharp eyes calculating and precise. Across the room, the timid baker she remembered from last year hovered nervously, adjusting the linen covering his quiche as though it were a delicate relic. A young man near the far table, tall and polished, caught her attention. He leaned in conspiratorially toward a companion and muttered, "Remember what happened with the last winner?" before straightening abruptly as Agatha's gaze met his. The words were innocent enough, but the glint in his eyes suggested layers she could not yet discern. Agatha arched an eyebrow, curiosity prickling at her senses. Who had been the last winner, and why did it merit such caution? Her eyes flicked across the hall and caught a small scrap of paper lying near a tray. Kneeling discreetly, she picked up a dropped recipe card. The handwriting smudged as though someone had been hasty or deliberately careless. Her fingers brushed the corner, and she tucked it carefully into her apron pocket, filing it in her mind as a small mystery to explore later. A thrill of anticipation ran through her. The contest, which should have been a simple culinary affair, already bore the subtle marks of intrigue. Agatha's attention was then drawn to a corner of the hall, where a figure leaned against the wall, arms crossed, head tilted as though studying her. There was nothing overtly threatening about the person, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a conservative dress, but something in her unwavering gaze set Agatha on alert. The watcher did not move as she navigated through the tables, yet the feeling of being observed lingered like a faint shadow. Taking a deep breath, Agatha allowed herself a small smile. The hall smelled of possibility, butter, eggs, and the quiet hum of competition. Beneath the layers of powdered sugar and golden crusts, she sensed currents of rivalry, ambition, and perhaps even secrets yet to be revealed. With a deliberate step toward her assigned table, she set down her bag, arranging her utensils and ingredients with care. Carsley's quiche contest, she realized, was never merely about baking. It was a microcosm of human foibles, whispered secrets, and delicate deceptions. And she, Agatha Raisin, would be ready to uncover them all. The hall erupted into a symphony of clinking bowls, sizzling pans, and the occasional sharp exclamation as the contest officially began. Agatha Raisin set to work with a precise calm, cracking eggs and whisking them into rich cream, all the while keeping one watchful eye on the chaos around her. Competitors darted between tables, their movements hurried and theatrical, and the faint scent of melted butter mingled with the earthy aroma of leeks and freshly grated cheese. The room was alive, buzzing with energy, ambition, and just enough tension to make every small mishap feel significant. Agatha focused on her quiche, smoothing the pastry into its tin and folding in her ingredients with practiced grace. Yet even as she worked, the faintest sense of unease tugged at her attention. Her bag of special herbs, carefully packed that morning, seemed lighter than it should be. She frowned, rummaging briefly, before noticing that one small jar of dried thyme was missing. A quick glance at the other tables revealed nothing out of place, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had moved it, deliberately or by accident. A soft laugh echoed from the corner, followed by a hasty apology. Agatha's eyes flicked toward the pantry door, where she caught a shadow slipping inside. When the door creaked open again, moments later, a young woman emerged, cheeks pink and eyes darting nervously. She avoided Agatha's gaze, but the brief interaction was enough to set the detective in her mind whirring. Someone here was nervous, or perhaps hiding something. As she returned to her mixing, Agatha noticed a smudge of flour that seemed oddly out of place on the rim of her stainless steel bowl. Leaning closer, she saw the faint impression of a fingerprint pressed into the surface. Curiosity sparked. She touched it lightly with her fingertip, already cataloging the oddities. The missing time, the whispering figure, and the unexplained mark. All of these were minor on their own, but together they hinted at a deliberate interference, a layer of mischief that elevated the contest from ordinary to quietly devious. Meanwhile, the other contestants carried on with their own dramas. Mrs. Bloxby fussed over her tart, muttering critiques under her breath, while the timid baker at the far end of the hall dropped an entire tray of quiches, muttering apologies that went unnoticed. A particularly flamboyant gentleman flourished his whisk in a grand arc, splattering cream across the edge of the counter, prompting a round of suppressed laughter. Agatha allowed herself a small smile, noting that village quirks were as essential to the event as the food itself. The minutes ticked by, each movement accompanied by the mingling scents of savory pastries, melted butter, and caramelizing onions. Agatha checked her oven with meticulous care, adjusting the temperature just slightly, and when she glanced again, she noticed that one of the dials seemed to have been nudged, almost imperceptibly. She reset it with quiet satisfaction, convinced it had been tampered with, but undecided whether by accident or design. At the far end of the hall, a figure whispered urgently to a companion, glancing toward her table before retreating with an exaggerated air of casualness. Agatha's eyes followed them, noting subtle exchanges of glances and murmured words, a choreography of secrecy she found irresistible. Beneath the chaos of mixing and tasting, a quiet puzzle was forming. Each hint an anomaly, a small breadcrumb for her to follow. With the quiche now nestled in the oven, Agatha leaned back for a moment, savoring the comforting warmth of her work, the lively buzz of the hall, and the subtle undercurrent of intrigue threading through the competition. Today's contest was no ordinary village gathering. Between the laughter, flour-dusted aprons, and aromatic delights, secrets were simmering, ready to reveal themselves to anyone clever enough to notice. And Agatha Raisin intended to notice everything.
Chapter 3. A Slice of Deception. The judges filed past the tables, their expressions a careful balance of neutrality and polite enthusiasm, tasting each quiche with deliberate slowness. Agatha Raisin watched them closely, her hands folded neatly in front of her apron, heart thumping with anticipation. The hall hummed with quiet conversation and the occasional soft gasp of admiration as the delicate pastries were sampled and the rich aromas of butter, cheese, and caramelized leeks swirled invitingly in the air. The comforting warmth of the room contrasted sharply with the prickling tension of observation. The first judge, a stout man with wire-rimmed glasses, picked up a slice from the nearest table, his brow furrowed ever so slightly, and his lips twitched as he chewed. Agatha's eyes narrowed. There had been a flinch, a subtle reaction, but enough to suggest that something was off. Murmurs rippled through nearby contestants. "Did you see that?" whispered a young woman. "I think there's been a recipe scandal," added another, voice barely above a breath. Agatha leaned forward slightly, her detective instincts alert. She observed faces carefully, noting the twitch of a mouth here, a sharp intake of breath there. A rival competitor, Mrs. Pembroke, shot a glance in Agatha's direction when her quiche was sampled. Her eyes widened fractionally, then darted away, a blush creeping over her cheeks. Agatha smiled inwardly,
Something in that reaction felt like a confession, or at least a crack in the facade. The hall, so familiar and quaint in appearance, had suddenly become a theater of subtle tension. Each judge's bite and each competitor's glance layered with potential meaning. When a plate reached her own table, Agatha kept her movements careful and composed. She had set her quiche with precision, garnished lightly with fresh herbs, the golden crust glinting under the hall's warm lights. The first judge took a slice, chewed thoughtfully, then nodded approvingly. The second, a younger woman with delicate features, lifted her fork and paused mid-bite, frowning ever so slightly. Agatha caught her eye. There was a fleeting shadow of doubt there, a hesitation that hinted at something amiss. As the judges moved along, a partially eaten quiche near the edge of the table caught Agatha's attention. The crust had been lifted slightly, and tucked beneath it was a small folded note. Carefully, she extracted it, noting the cryptic words, "Not everything baked is meant to be shared." Her curiosity deepened. Who had left it and why? The note added a new layer of intrigue to an event that had already started to feel less like a contest and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. The hum of whispered speculation and clinking cutlery continued around her. Agatha's gaze flitted between the contestants and the judges, noticing subtle patterns, furtive glances, brief exchanges of words under breath, and a fleeting sense of collusion in the way some competitors leaned toward one another. Clues about past contests surfaced in her memory. An overturned tart, a suspiciously altered recipe, a narrow victory decided by a contentious point. Something unspoken, lingering, threaded through the village's quiche history, and it was beginning to surface again. By the time the final plates were sampled, Agatha had catalogued every unusual reaction, every flicker of expression, every whispered comment. The quiches themselves were perfection, golden and fragrant, yet it was the interplay of human behavior, the concealed rivalries, the subtle hints of sabotage, the quiet confessions hidden in fleeting gestures that captivated her attention. For Agatha Raisin, the taste test was far more than an evaluation of pastry. It was a map of secrets, a beginning of discovery, and a gentle unraveling of deception delicately folded into the heart of Carsley's most cherished tradition.
The contest had concluded, leaving a lingering hum of conversation and the soft clatter of dishes being cleared. Agatha Raisin lingered near her table, taking in the aftermath with a careful, observant eye. The hall was gradually emptying, contestants exchanging polite congratulations and tentative smiles. Yet amidst the cheerful chatter, she felt a peculiar tension, a subtle undercurrent that hinted the day's events were not as innocent as they appeared. Her gaze fell on her own quiche tin. The pastry, normally golden and pristine, bore a faint indentation along one edge. A quick inspection revealed a small shift in the filling's arrangement, subtle but unmistakable. Agatha's pulse quickened. Ingredients had been tampered with. Someone had been close enough to alter her creation, intentionally or carelessly, and the act carried a suggestion of mischief, or worse, deliberate sabotage. She pressed her fingers to the surface, noting a faint fingerprint that hadn't been there earlier. As she catalogued the irregularities, a scrap of paper fluttered from beneath a nearby tray. Curious, Agatha picked it up and smoothed it flat. It was part of a recipe, torn haphazardly, the handwriting angular and unfamiliar. The ingredients listed did not match the quiche she had prepared. Something or someone had introduced a foreign element into the contest. Her detective instincts, honed over years of noticing the subtle and the hidden, tingled in response. Small details, the shifted filling, the torn note, and the faint fingerprint formed a trail that beckoned her to follow. Agatha leaned against the table, observing the remaining contestants as they packed up their belongings. A few lingered near the hall entrance, speaking in hushed tones, glancing occasionally toward her table. Whispers, casual on the surface, seemed loaded with meaning. "Did you see the mess with the Pembroke's tart?" a voice murmured. Another added, "It almost didn't make it to the judging at all." Agatha noted the subtle tension between neighbors, the fleeting looks exchanged, the careful selection of words designed to be overheard without revealing too much. A shadow caught her attention. In the far corner,
A figure stood partially obscured by a folding screen, arms crossed, head tilting just slightly as though watching her every move. Agatha's eyes narrowed, but when she looked again moments later, the figure had shifted just enough to blend with the dispersing crowd. It was the sort of observation that sent a quiet thrill through her, evidence that someone wanted to remain hidden and perhaps intended to gauge her reaction. Seeking counsel, she made her way to a trusted friend, Mr. Coma, the village archivist and occasional confidant in matters both trivial and peculiar. She recounted her observations quietly, gesturing to the subtle shifts in her quiche and the torn note. His eyebrows lifted and he nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the undercurrent she described. Together they began to assemble initial deductions, small but significant irregularities, deliberate alterations, and a pattern suggesting that the contest was serving as more than a culinary competition. Agatha stepped back, surveying the quiet hall now almost empty of participants. The lingering aromas of baked goods, rich butter, caramelized onions, melted cheese, reminded her of the comforting normalcy she loved. Yet intertwined with those scents was a whisper of intrigue. Something hidden had surfaced today, subtle but undeniable. Her mind raced with possibilities, mapping connections, cataloging oddities, and noting the shadowy watcher. The day's events had begun as a simple contest, but Agatha knew that the true mystery was only just beginning. With a quiet determination, she folded the torn recipe carefully into her apron pocket, eyes scanning the hall one last time. Every crumb, every whisper, every glance carried potential meaning. Today had offered hints, and she was more than ready to follow them, step by step, into the secrets lying behind Carsley's quaintest tradition. Chapter 4. Secrets in the Crust. The village of Carsley had long since drifted into slumber, the cobblestone streets bathed in silver moonlight and the soft whisper of wind through autumn leaves. Agatha Raisin wrapped herself in a thick shawl and stepped quietly from her cottage, the night cool against her skin. The invitation to investigate the day's oddities had stirred her curiosity beyond measure, and sleep seemed a distant notion compared to the lure of hidden clues. Her boots clicked softly on the uneven stones as she made her way to the village hall, empty now except for shadows and lingering aromas of the day's baking. The doors were locked, but Agatha had anticipated that. A set of old keys, carefully kept for such occasions, fit the lock with a gentle turn. The hall exhaled warmth and the faint scent of butter, caramelized onions and leeks still clinging to its surfaces. Agatha paused, letting her eyes adjust to the dim glow of her lantern. Everything appeared calm, yet she could feel the presence of the day's secrets woven into the corners and cracks. She stepped cautiously inside, heels soft against the polished floor, and allowed herself to examine every surface with meticulous attention. Her gaze first fell on the tables where quiches had been displayed. She ran a careful hand along the edges of tins and utensils, noting subtle scuffs and smudges that had gone unnoticed in the chaos of judging. Near one corner, tucked beneath a folding chair, she discovered a small spice jar she did not recognize. Its lid bore faint fingerprints, and when she lifted it, a familiar scent, cinnamon mixed with a hint of nutmeg, wafted upward. A shiver ran down her spine. The fragrance stirred memories of an old, nearly forgotten recipe from a past contest, a detail that now felt highly significant. Moving toward the pantry, Agatha's eyes caught the crumpled remains of a note, smudged as though hastily discarded. She picked it up gingerly, smoothing it out to read the partial lines, words about timing and the final taste. Each phrase seemed carefully chosen, a breadcrumb left behind either intentionally or by accident. Her mind catalogued possibilities, connecting this note with the torn recipe from earlier, with the fingerprint on her mixing bowl, and with the subtle exchanges she had witnessed among contestants during the day. As she crouched to examine the floor near the storage area, Agatha noticed footprints pressed lightly into the dust. They led toward the small room in the back, then stopped abruptly, as if the person had vanished or slipped through a hidden exit. A soft click echoed through the hall. She froze, heart quickening. Somewhere, a lock had shifted, though there was no visible movement. Whoever had been here before her, she realized, might still be observing, unseen, yet aware of her intrusion. She retraced the steps, letting her lantern's glow illuminate corners previously overlooked, the edge of a folding table, the gap beneath the cupboard, the faint indentation in the rug where someone might have knelt. Each discovery layered the space with intrigue, each sound and shadow reinforcing her sense that the hall was far from empty. Even in the quietest moments, the hall seemed alive, holding secrets too small to see at a glance, but too important to ignore. Standing in the center of the hall, Agatha exhaled slowly, savoring the mixture of solitude, anticipation, and subtle suspense. The night wrapped her in gentle shadows, and the clues she had uncovered promised more revelations yet to come. Somewhere in the darkness, someone had been moving, observing, and perhaps leaving deliberate hints. And she, Agatha Raisin, would follow those traces wherever they led, unraveling the secrets that lay hidden in the crusts and corners of Carsley's village hall.
The morning sun spilled warmly over Carsley, turning cobblestones golden and casting long shadows from the tidy hedges along the lanes. Agatha Raisin, dressed in a sensible coat with her signature pastel scarf, strolled purposefully toward the village square, a notebook tucked beneath her arm. Her mission was clear: collect small details, subtle slips of memory, and casual confessions from the villagers, all while maintaining the appearance of a friendly neighbor on a leisurely morning walk. Her first stop was Mrs. Trumble's bakery, a cheerful little shop, fragrant with cinnamon rolls and the sweet tang of freshly baked bread. Mrs. Trumbull, flour-dusted apron and all, greeted Agatha with her usual effervescence. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin. Your quiche entry was simply divine yesterday," she beamed. Agatha smiled politely and inquired casually about the contest. Mrs. Trumbull's tone shifted, a faint shadow passing over her features. "Well, it wasn't always as simple as it seems. Remember the year the Pembrokes— Well, never mind," she added hastily, glancing toward the door. Agatha made a careful note of the abruptness and the unspoken detail, sensing a long-buried rivalry lingering beneath the flower-scented air. From there, she wandered to the small village shop, where Mr. Hargreaves, the owner and occasional gossip, stood behind the counter, polishing jars. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin, looking for something sweet or something scandalous?" he joked, eyes twinkling. Agatha inquired about last year's competition, and he laughed nervously. "Oh, just the usual mischief. Some people get rather inventive with ingredients," he chuckled, but avoided her gaze when she pressed further. Something about his evasiveness suggested he knew more than he let on, or perhaps feared the wrong question might awaken old tensions. Passing the village green, Agatha noticed a flicker of movement out of her corner of eye. A figure she didn't recognize was lingering near the fountain, maintaining a casual posture, yet clearly tracking her. She quickened her pace subtly, pretending to admire the flowers, all the while cataloging the stranger's presence in her mind. Someone was watching, whether out of curiosity or intent, and it added another thread of unease to the morning's inquiries. Her final stop was the small antique shop, where young Miss Clover adjusted delicate figurines on glass shelves. "Good morning, Mrs. Raisin. You may want to keep an eye on that quiche contest of yours. Odd things have a way of turning up where you least expect them." Agatha's attention sharpened. The cryptic warning, delivered with such innocent charm, hinted at something more significant. Her gaze fell to a small, tarnished tin on the counter, the same one used in a minor mishap during a contest 2 years past. Its presence here, mundane as it seemed, now took on a deeper significance.
By the time she returned to her cottage, her mind was a tangle of observations and impressions. Friendly conversation unveiled hidden rivalries, subtle evasions, and gentle warnings, all threads pointing to patterns she intended to follow. The village, as quaint and charming as it appeared, was layered with history, small secrets, and whispers that only someone like her could untangle. With a quiet smile, she settled down with her notebook, ready to connect the dots between yesterday's tampering and the echoes of contests past. Chapter 5. The Recipe of Deception. The village library was quiet, a sanctuary of polished oak shelves, the faint musk of old paper, and sunlight streaming in through tall, arched windows. Agatha Raisin moved deliberately between the aisles, her fingers brushing along spines of leather-bound books, some worn, some gilded with age. Today, she wasn't seeking a story for leisure. She was following threads of history, hoping to uncover patterns that might illuminate the mysteries surrounding the current quiche contest. She approached the local archives, a section tucked into a back corner behind a narrow rolling ladder. Dust motes danced in the sunlight as she carefully lifted a box labeled Quiche and Tea Contest, records 1980 to 2010. Inside were yellowed sheets of paper, handwritten notes, and photographs capturing smiling villagers with golden brown pastries. Agatha's eyes scanned the pages with practiced attention, noting winners, runners-up, and occasional peculiarities. A dropped tray, a quiche slightly overcooked, a judging mishap delicately omitted from official notes. A faded recipe card fell from the top of the box. Its edges were frayed, the ink slightly blurred with age, yet a symbol in the corner, a tiny swirl inside a circle, matched precisely the cryptic flourish she had seen on the mysterious invitation. Her heart quickened. Someone or some pattern was threading the present contest with echoes from the past. She tucked the card carefully into her notebook, eager to compare it with her own observations from the current competition. Turning the pages of an old scrapbook, Agatha found photographs of past winners. One in particular caught her attention, a tall, slender figure with sharp eyes, standing beside a golden quiche, gazing directly at the camera. Her breath caught. The posture, the expression, even the tilt of the head reminded her uncannily of a contestant she had seen earlier that week, someone who had been unusually attentive during judging. Could this person be connected to the chain of rivalries and sabotage she had begun to suspect? Marginal notes, scratched in the margins of some reports, offered subtle clues. Phrases like suspected swap, secret ingredient withheld, and unexplained advantage hinted at deliberate actions rather than random mishaps. Her mind raced. Patterns were emerging, linking incidents decades apart. Rivalries, secret tactics, and unexplained advantages now seemed less like coincidences and more like carefully orchestrated moves in a long-standing game. She leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet of the library settle around her, punctuated by the occasional creak of floorboards as another patron passed. Agatha's gaze swept across the stacks, cataloging the archival evidence, connecting it to what she had observed recently: the missing spice, the smudged fingerprints, the whispered warnings. The hallmarks of deception spanned years, and the latest contest was merely the newest installment. A small smile crept across her face. Cozy and quaint as Carsley appeared, it had a history of secrets baked into its very traditions. With each document, photograph, and faded note, Agatha felt herself stepping further into the roles of both historian and detective. The past was whispering its patterns to her, and she intended to follow those whispers, piece by piece, to reveal the full story hiding behind the golden crusts and polite smiles of the village's beloved quiche contests. Agatha Raisin stepped out of the library, inhaling the crisp afternoon air that carried a hint of wood smoke and the lingering scent of fallen leaves. Her arms were laden with archival notes and the carefully preserved recipe card she had discovered, and her mind buzzed with connections between past contest scandals and the present quiche competition. For once, her steps were brisk, eager to return to the comfort of her cottage and sift through the accumulated clues in peace. Yet, as she walked down the cobblestone lane, her instincts prickled. A figure lingered near the corner of the square, partially hidden by the shadow of a shop awning. At first she thought it a coincidence, perhaps another villager going about their day. But the way the person shifted, head tilting as if watching her specifically, set her senses alight. Agatha slowed her pace, pretending to examine a display of autumnal flowers, all the while keeping the figure in her peripheral vision. The stranger moved closer under the guise of browsing the market stalls, and for a moment the casual facade seemed convincing. Then, with a deft, almost theatrical movement, a small folded note was slipped into the strap of her satchel. Agatha barely had time to feel the paper's presence before the person melted back into the crowd, leaving only the faint rustle of fabric in their wake. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill of unexpected intrigue. Finding a quiet corner beneath the elm tree outside the village green, Agatha carefully unfolded the note. Written in neat but unusual script were the words, "The Quiche Past remembers more than the present sees. Seek the hidden ingredient, and you will understand." She read it twice, savoring the mystery embedded in the lines. The term Quiche Past resonated immediately, echoing rediscoveries at the library and linking history with today's competition. Whoever had left the note clearly knew of the ongoing chain of secrets and perhaps even anticipated her investigation. Her mind raced as she retraced the day's events. The missing spice, the smudged fingerprint, the partial recipe, and now this cryptic message. They formed a trail she was only beginning to understand. A familiar face, possibly someone she had seen earlier in the hall or near the contest, might have been observing her all along, staying just out of reach, yet leaving hints deliberately. Her imagination danced through possibilities, but her reasoning remained sharp. Each detail was a clue, each subtle interaction a breadcrumb toward unraveling the larger mystery. The village itself, sunny and quaint in the afternoon light, contrasted with the undercurrent of suspense that threaded through Agatha's thoughts. Children played by the fountain, neighbors exchanged greetings, and the faint aroma of pastries from the bakery mingled with the earthy scent of fallen leaves. The streets were cozy, familiar, and welcoming, yet for Agatha, every corner now carried the potential for discovery, every passerby a possible participant in the unfolding puzzle. With a deep breath, she settled on a bench and unfolded her notebook, carefully comparing the new message with the archival evidence she had gathered. The Quiche Past, she realized, was not just history, it was an active force, shaping the present contest and testing her observational skills. A gentle thrill of anticipation coursed through her. The mystery was deepening, and Agatha Raisin, as ever, was ready to follow its breadcrumbs wherever they might lead.
Chapter 6. A Tangled Web of Tarts. Agatha Raisin moved through the village with the careful pace of someone balancing observation with discretion. Her notebook was clasped tightly in one hand, a fountain pen tucked beneath her wrist, and her sharp eyes darted from cottage to cottage, noting details that might escape a less attentive observer. Today's goal was simple in theory: gather information from villagers, collect seemingly mundane facts, and quietly map the web of connections that might explain the recent tampering at the quiche contest. In practice, it was anything but simple. Her first visit was to the cozy home of Mrs. Pembroke, whose elaborate hats and polished shoes had always signaled a woman of particular pride and, as Agatha suspected, strong opinions. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin, do come in," Mrs. Pembroke said with a flourish, waving toward the parlor filled with delicate porcelain and gilded frames. As Agatha sipped the tea,
poured with exaggerated elegance. She listened carefully. Mrs. Pembroke mentioned innocuous details at first, chatting about the weather and the harvest festival, but gradually her words hinted at rivalry. A quip about the unexpected success of newcomers lingered with Agatha. Subtle emphasis on certain names and slight pauses suggested grudges left unspoken for years. Next she wandered to the edge of the village where the small allotments were tended by Mr. and Mrs. Crowley. The couple, cheerful and slightly bumbling, offered vegetables from their patch while gossiping freely. "You know, Agatha, there was a spice missing from last year's quiche. No one ever asked about it," Mr. Crowley said with a mischievous grin. Agatha noted the detail carefully. Could this be the same ingredient that had gone missing during the current contest? She made a mental note to investigate the source further. Every clue added a new thread to the complex tapestry of village secrets. A brief stop at the post office brought another layer of intrigue. Mrs. Brindle, always anxious and meticulously neat, accidentally let slip a comment about a favor owed to the last winner. She noticed her slip immediately, coughing lightly and adjusting her glasses, but the damage was done. Agatha's mind raced. Favors, hidden debts, and subtle manipulation. These were ingredients that could influence more than quiche recipes. She jotted down the words and moved on, observing Mrs. Brindle's unusual nervousness and the tiny scrap of parchment sticking out from behind the counter. Throughout her rounds, Agatha noticed small anomalies. A teaspoon left carelessly atop a shelf, a folded napkin in a peculiar location, a basket overturned with no apparent cause. Each seemed minor, yet in combination they painted a picture of covert communication, deliberate distraction, or hidden messages intended for the observant. Her mind mapped connections between whispered confessions, unexplained absences, and the subtle placement of objects, forming a network of suspicion that grew more intricate with every encounter. By late afternoon, Agatha returned to her cottage, notebook brimming with observations, sketches of routes, and lists of names. She sipped a cup of tea, allowing herself a small smile. The village, so seemingly serene and charming, had layers of secrets, rivalries, and past misdeeds that twisted beneath the surface like invisible threads. Old feuds, unspoken jealousies, and forgotten scandals were revealing themselves piece by piece. And the missing spice, the cryptic note, and now her carefully mapped observations promised to bring the hidden web into focus. Agatha leaned back in her chair, pen poised above her notebook, and traced the lines of possible connections. Each villager's quirks, confessions, and careless slips created a constellation of motives, opportunities, and hidden alliances. The mystery was deepening, the stakes rising subtly, and she was poised to follow every thread to uncover the tangled web at the heart of Carsley's quiche contest.
The hall was quiet now, emptied of laughter, chatter, and the scent of baking. Agatha Raisin approached the back door, which she had noticed earlier was slightly ajar. Curiosity pricked at her. A faint draught carried a whiff of dust and aged wood, promising secrets long hidden. She crouched and pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into shadows. The air smelled cool, faintly earthy, and carried a hint of forgotten spices. Carefully she descended, lantern in hand, illuminating the walls lined with shelves laden with long unused kitchen equipment. Copper bowls, tarnished and stacked, glinted in the soft glow, and jars of ingredients, some labeled and some not, peeked from the shadows. Each item seemed ordinary, yet Agatha could sense that history and perhaps mischief was hidden among them. Her footsteps echoed softly, mingling with the faint creak of the wooden floorboards. Near the far wall, partially obscured by an overturned crate, she spotted a leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked with age. She picked it up with reverent curiosity, flipping through pages filled with handwritten recipes, notes, and annotations. Some were ordinary, but others bore cryptic remarks. Ensure the time is late. Do not let the sugar touch until the final fold. And a particularly striking entry referencing the very first contest. The winner's secret remains buried as it should. Agatha's pulse quickened. The sabotage she had glimpsed in the current contest was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern stretching back decades. As she examined the shelves, her fingers brushed against a small, unmarked jar tucked behind larger containers. The aroma was subtle, yet distinctive, a blend of herbs she recognized from her earlier investigations. It matched the missing ingredient from yesterday's contest. Agatha's mind raced, connecting the dots. Fingerprints, cryptic notes, mysterious observers, and now a physical trace linking past and present. Whoever had orchestrated these subtle acts of mischief was meticulous, and their knowledge spanned years. A soft creak echoed from above, startling her briefly. Shadows danced across the walls as she held her lantern higher, illuminating cobwebbed corners and forgotten utensils. The sound of a lock clicking faintly in the distance reminded her that she was not alone in thinking about these secrets, though no one was immediately visible. The cellar, cozy yet shadowed, held the history of village rivalry and quiet subterfuge, and Agatha felt herself at the very center of an intricate puzzle. She carefully closed the notebook and set it in her bag, examining the cellar once more for overlooked clues. Tiny scuffs on the floorboards suggested someone had been here recently, arranging items or checking the jars. Each observation strengthened her theory. The tampering at the current contest was deliberate, connected to long-standing rivalries, and someone still active in Carsley was ensuring the patterns continued. Rising to her feet, Agatha felt a surge of both satisfaction and anticipation. The cellar had whispered its secrets, and now she possessed the first concrete pieces of the puzzle she had been chasing for days.
Chapter 7. The Quiche Confrontation. Agatha Raisin sat in the quiet of her cottage, sunlight filtering through lace curtains and catching the golden crumbs still lingering from her morning pastry. Her notebook lay open across the table, brimming with observations, sketches of the village hall, notes from the library, and cryptic annotations from the cellar. She sipped her tea thoughtfully, letting the familiar warmth of the cup ground her as her mind retraced every detail she had collected. Slowly, the pieces began to form a pattern, and a clear picture of the likely saboteur emerged. Her eyes drifted first to the torn recipe, its angular handwriting and carefully hidden symbols echoing across the decades. Then came the shadowy figures, the furtive glances at the contest, and the fingerprints on displaced utensils. Agatha's mental map traced a line from the library archives to the missing spice, to whispered remarks from villagers, and finally to the subtle but telling behaviors she had observed at the hall. One person in particular, the rival competitor who had reacted so sharply to her quiche during the tasting, kept appearing at the center of multiple threads, their movements and hesitations quietly betraying involvement. She tapped her pan against the notebook, considering her approach. A direct confrontation would be unseemly at a public gathering, and she intended to preserve the charm of the village event. Instead, she decided to use a subtle strategy, observing closely, while creating opportunities for the saboteur's behavior to reveal itself. Humor and gentle misdirection would be her allies. Agatha knew how to frame questions and observations in ways that appeared casual, yet would pressure the guilty party to reveal something inadvertently. Her gaze fell on the notes from the cellar. The phrase referencing the first winner's secret and the carefully annotated margins suggested a long-standing motive, envy, pride, and the desire to control the legacy of the contest. Agatha smiled wryly. The history of sabotage was intricate,
and now she could see how past and present interwove, the missing ingredients, the whispered warnings, the cryptic notes, all following a familiar rhythm. She carefully highlighted key entries and compared them to current events, noting the small details that would confirm the pattern in her favor. Next, she examined behavioral cues from her observations. The suspect had been unusually attentive to timing, lingering near her table without reason, carrying an object, a small, distinctive measuring spoon, that had appeared in past contest photographs. Agatha's mind ticked through possibilities. The spoon could have been used to manipulate measurements subtly, ensuring flavor discrepancies or ingredient substitutions went unnoticed by judges. She jotted this down, labeling it a key piece of evidence for the impending confrontation. By late afternoon, Agatha rehearsed the subtle moves she would employ during the evening gathering. A casual comment here, a glance there, the careful placement of the notebook to observe reactions. Each step was designed to allow the saboteur to incriminate themselves without causing public embarrassment or scandal. She practiced her expressions in the mirror, a gentle smirk or raised eyebrow ready to convey surprise or curiosity, all in the spirit of coaxing the truth out gently. Finally, she leaned back, satisfied with her plan. The cottage smelled of baked pastry and spiced tea, cozy and comforting, yet her mind was fully engaged in the intricate puzzle. The web of deception had been mapped, connections traced, and the likely culprit identified. Agatha Raisin, detective and village connoisseur, was ready to navigate the final gathering with poise, humor, and clever subtlety, turning the day's charming quiche event into the perfect stage for revelation.
The village hall was bathed in the gentle glow of afternoon sunlight, streaming through the tall windows and illuminating tables neatly arranged with delicate china, lace doilies, and steaming teapots. Agatha Raisin moved among the chairs with practiced ease, selecting a central table where the key villagers would gather for what she promised herself would be a most enlightening cup of tea. The quiet hum of chatter and the occasional clink of spoons against porcelain set the perfect cozy backdrop for a revelation that would blend charm, humor, and the satisfaction of a mystery resolved. She poured her own tea, glancing at each guest with an air of casual attentiveness. The suspect, seated a few chairs away, smiled politely, yet betrayed a flicker of unease whenever Agatha's gaze fell upon them. Gently, she began weaving the conversation toward the contest. It's remarkable how even a small spice can alter the taste entirely, she mused, stirring her tea with deliberate slowness. One wonders how much history lingers in these recipes. The room, attentive but relaxed, followed her words, sensing something afoot without alarm. As she spoke, Agatha subtly revealed the connections she had traced. The torn recipe notes, fingerprints, cryptic cellar annotations, and repeated references to past contests. Her voice was calm, her tone lightly humorous, and her observations carefully framed as curious musings rather than accusations. Villagers nodded, murmured in agreement, and laughed quietly at familiar quirks she highlighted. Then she paused, allowing her gaze to linger meaningfully on the saboteur. A slight flush rose to their cheeks, and a distinctive measuring spoon, the one she had noticed earlier, twitched nervously in their hand. "Curious, isn't it," she continued softly, "that certain ingredients, carefully hidden or misplaced, have repeatedly influenced the outcomes here over the years?" The suspect's fork trembled slightly, and other villagers leaned forward, suddenly intrigued. Agatha smiled, letting the tension build just enough to elicit attention without creating discomfort. And sometimes someone takes a little extra interest in ensuring the recipe, perfect as it may seem, is just a touch altered. Finally, she allowed the moment to settle. The suspect exhaled, shoulders easing as they looked around the table. "All right, I suppose it's time to confess," they admitted, voice low yet audible. "It was never meant to cause harm, only to test, to see if the legacy of the contest could be challenged. I feared the history of the Quiche Past might be forgotten, and I acted to preserve its lessons. Gasps, and then laughter rippled gently around the table as villagers processed the revelation. Agatha nodded knowingly, her eyes twinkling. A minor character, Mrs. Trumbull, chuckled softly. "Well, I never thought a measuring spoon could cause such commotion." Others joined, amused, and even the suspect could not help but smile. Agatha lifted her cup in a small toast. The first winner's secret ingredient, long whispered about and meticulously guarded, had finally been acknowledged. The mystery had been unraveled, the rivalries acknowledged, and the village's charm restored, cozy, humorous, and satisfying, leaving everyone with both clarity and delight.
Chapter 8. Settling the Crumbs. Carsley had settled into its familiar rhythm once more. The streets, calm and lined with the soft golden light of late afternoon. Agatha Raisin strolled along the cobbled lanes, taking in the scent of baking bread, wood smoke curling from chimneys, and the faint perfume of chrysanthemums dotting cottage gardens. The events of the past week, the quiche contest, the subtle sabotage, and her quiet investigation seemed like a distant hum, now transformed into memories tinged with humor and satisfaction. She paused at the fountain in the village square, watching a group of children chase each other with carefree laughter. Villagers passed by, offering warm smiles and friendly nods. Many stopped to compliment her once again on her quiche, the conversation flowing naturally into shared stories of past contests. "I still can't believe you solved it without so much as a scene," Mrs. Trumbull said, flour dusting her apron. Agatha smiled, tilting her head with mock modesty. "Detective work, my dear, often requires patience and a good cup of tea." Her eyes twinkled, and the women laughed, the sound mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves overhead. Inside the village hall, Agatha lingered briefly, tidying a few forgotten items from the contest. She noticed the measuring spoon, carefully cleaned and set aside, and couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of its pivotal role. The cellar, with its hidden jars and dusty notebooks, had revealed secrets long buried, and yet the hall now felt lighter, freer, as if the act of uncovering truth had lifted a weight from its walls. As she wandered past the small market, Agatha exchanged greetings and brief conversations. Mr. Hargreaves proudly displayed new preserves, Mrs. Brindle carefully arranged her post parcels, and the Crowleys offered her a small basket of autumn vegetables. Each interaction, ordinary yet comforting, underscored the strength of community. Even minor rivalries, now acknowledged, were met with gentle teasing rather than tension, and the villagers seemed lighter, more at ease. Agatha allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The cryptic note, the whisper of the Quiche Past, and the patterns she had traced through decades of contests now felt like threads woven into a larger tapestry of village life. She noted the subtle lessons learned, that history often repeated itself in small, unnoticed ways, that curiosity and observation could illuminate the hidden motives behind everyday actions, and that kindness, humor, and tact could resolve tension more effectively than confrontation alone. Yet a small, playful part of her mind lingered on a minor, seemingly inconsequential detail. A faded ribbon she had spotted tucked in the back of the hall, still waiting to be examined. A gentle smile curved her lips. Some mysteries, she mused, could wait for another day. After all, Carsley had a way of keeping secrets just long enough to make life interesting, and Agatha Raisin had learned to savor the balance between curiosity and contentment. With a final glance at the sunlit cottages and familiar garden gates, she walked toward her own cozy home, notebook in hand. The village, in all its charm, whimsy, and hidden complexities, had returned to tranquility. Agatha felt the satisfying warmth of closure
and accomplishment, tempered by the gentle knowledge that more adventures, and perhaps more hidden ingredients, lay just beyond the horizon. Carsley hummed with life, ordinary yet endlessly intriguing, and Agatha Raisin, ever observant, was ready for whatever crumbs of mystery might come next.
Agatha Raisin settled into the familiar comfort of her cottage, the evening sun casting a soft amber glow through the lace curtain. The kettle hissed gently on the stove, filling the room with the warm, reassuring scent of brewing tea. Beside her, a small plate held a slice of her freshly baked quiche, golden and fragrant, still steaming slightly from the oven. Her cat, Mr. Whiskers, curled lazily on the windowsill, his tail flicking in quiet anticipation of crumbs or a stray morsel. She poured herself a cup of tea, steam curling upward like wisps of thought. Sipping slowly, Agatha reflected on the day's events, the revelation at the tea table, the subtle uncovering of motives, the unexpected confessions, and the gentle laughter that had filled the village hall. Each moment had blended charm, humor, and quiet suspense into a tapestry she could now savor in full. She set down her cup with a satisfied clink and reached for her notebook, leafing through pages filled with sketches, observations, and neatly recorded connections. Mr. Whiskers leapt gracefully onto her lap, nudging a pencil aside with a soft paw. Agatha chuckled, scratching behind her ears. "Yes, yes, the cat is part of the investigation, too," she murmured, amused by his insistent presence. Her thoughts wandered back to minor mishaps, a spilled spice jar, an accidental scuffle over a measuring spoon, and the bemused reactions of villagers as small secrets were revealed. Even the shadowy figures, the cryptic notes, and the cellar's forgotten ingredients now felt like fond memories rather than sources of tension, woven seamlessly into the village's quaint life. A small unopened letter sat on the table beside her teacup. Agatha's eyes flicked to it, curiosity piqued despite her desire for a quiet evening. Its envelope was cream-colored, with an elegant flourish she did not immediately recognize. She smiled to herself, imagining what future mysteries it might contain. Another quiche contest, perhaps, or an entirely new culinary puzzle. The thought teased her imagination, offering just enough intrigue to promise that life in Carsley would never be entirely predictable. Outside, the wind rustled gently through the trees, carrying the faint scent of autumn and distant wood smoke. Mr. Whiskers twitched his ears and gazed toward the window, tail flicking with a flicker of alertness at a sound only he seemed to notice. Agatha followed his gaze briefly, then returned to her slice of quiche, feeling a warm sense of contentment. The village, with its cobbled streets, fragrant cottages, and enduring inhabitants, had returned to peace, and she was part of the rhythm, quietly observing and savoring it all. Leaning back in her chair, Agatha sipped the last of her tea and let her mind drift. There were lessons learned, mysteries unraveled, and gentle chuckles to recall. Yet a part of her relished the idea that there were always more crumbs to follow, more secrets to discover, and more warmth and laughter to enjoy along the way. With Mr. Whiskers purring softly on her lap, a faint glow from the lamp, and the comforting aroma of pastry in the air, Agatha Raisin felt entirely at home, perfectly at peace, and ready for whatever the next adventure might bring.